Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Pete Mockaitis in Chicago, Illinois. Pete is an award-winning trainer who's served clients in over 50 countries. His work has enhanced Fortune 100 corporations, high-growth startups, and major nonprofits. He's conducted coaching sessions for over 700 thinkers from every Ivy League university and world-class organizations, including Apple, Goldman Sachs, Google, and the United Nations. He's also the host of the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast. Pete, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, Angela, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's so exciting to talk. We originally connected, I think, in July at the Podcast Movement conference that was also in Chicago.
That's right. We almost missed each other. We were waiting for our respective Ubers, but thankfully we made a connection.
Yeah, it was really quick. But I think that we both had business cards, which is pretty key when you're making new connections.
Well, I thought it was so funny because some people are anti-business card, and you think podcasters would be so, high-tech and hip and cool with technology, but everybody had business cards at that event.
Yeah, no, that's true. Actually, I came home with a ton of business cards. I still have yours. It's really good. So in addition to everything I mentioned in the introduction, you are actually the owner of a company. Your company is called Optimality. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit about what Optimality does and what got you interested to start the business.
Oh, sure thing, yes. And I'd say Optimality is really just a name I picked because I thought, anything and everything I'm interested in, it's kind of about optimizing and making it the best it can be. So I'd say in terms of how to get interested, I'd say when I was about in 8th grade, I was reading lots and lots of books about success, goal setting, leadership, teamwork, communication, productivity stuff. And I was super into it at that young age, and I had my favorite Dewey Decimal number, 158.1, which is success, psychological aspects. And so I just became fascinated with it, and it just never left me. So I thought that's really what I want to do, is I want to help develop people in terms of, sharing with them powerful knowledge that can transform the experience of them being alive. And lately it's taken a work skills trajectory, and it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great. So when you go into one of these big corporations, what exactly are you trying to help them to do? What are you, what's the kind of change that you're helping them to make?
Oh, sure thing. Well, lately, the biggest or most commonly occurring thing is I deliver a program called Enhanced Thinking and Collaboration Training, or ETC. And I think of it as sort of like et cetera. It's like, and the rest of the skills, kind of beyond your technical skills that you need to flourish. So we talk a lot about some of the things in the Strategy Consultant's Toolkit in terms of having a good structure and set of categories for your problem and communicating succinctly using an answer first that we discussed. And so a lot of sort of tips and tricks and tools in order to think better and to solve problems and collaborate better. And what's been so exciting is just the results there in terms of, we've seen like sort of the before and after evaluations. We're seeing folks kind of saving an average of about 1.4 hours per week of waste just, banished in terms of less rework, less irrelevant meetings, less misunderstanding, and having to kind of re-clarify, what we actually want. And so it's been pretty rewarding to feel like I'm giving folks a great return such that it's a bargain and they're thrilled to have bought it, which is a great feeling as a business owner.
Oh, that's good. So you mentioned that you teach Answer First, is that right, as part of your program?
Well, that is one of the tools, yes.
Yeah. And just so quickly, can you share with us, in case we haven't heard before about Answer First, what is Answer First?
Oh, sure. That's just an approach you might use in communicating just anything in terms of if you're exploring something, doing some analysis, one way of answering a question or communicating is to just kind of tell the narrative tale of how you came to where you are, which is quite common. You might say, well, you know what? I fired up a database, and I pulled these data, and I did a pivot table. And within that pivot table, I segmented by this and that. And so, like, the listener kind of doesn't care. They're kind of tuning out at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, if the first thing you say is the answer, the outcome, the implication, it kind of galvanizes the attention and is just more succinct. So if overall you say, it turns out that customer segment X has been abandoning us in a hurry. I say so because sales have declined from this group year over year by over 20%, which is far greater than any other segment. So that's kind of a little bit more attention-grabbing and a little bit more succinct and direct, and it results in kind of focusing the conversation and completing that content in a shorter time.
Yeah, I love Answer First. And the interesting thing about Answer First from what I've seen is it's a technique that's used a lot in consulting. And in fact, speaking of consulting, you actually have worked both as a consultant for both Bain & Company and for the Bridgespan Group. And I really wanted to take a couple of minutes to sort of dive into that background because I know for many listeners and many people I talk to that career path is truly a dream. And sometimes, we just have no idea where to begin when we're interested in that particular career. I'd love it if you might just share a little bit about how you were able to land your first job at Bain.
Oh, sure thing. Well, I ended up landing it right out of undergrad, and it was actually through their internship program specifically. And you say dream come true, and my gosh, yes, that was my dream. I was a little, I don't know what the word is, but when I was a freshman in college, I think I had a little bit of an attitude. And maybe I was super focused. Like, when I graduate, I'm going to work at McKinsey & Company, the Boston Consulting Group, or Bain & Company. And that was just like it. And I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, ILL, and the firms hired a couple folks a year from the school, but not a whole lot. It was not kind of a super high priority kind of an Ivy League school in the recruiting picture.
Mm-hmm.
But I was interested, and I was networking, and I was talking to people, and I remember my buddy Jeff was the first person I knew who got a job at one of these firms. I was like, oh my gosh, Jeff, you have to tell me everything. And so we had a couple calls. I was like, what are you working on now? Oh, that sounds amazing. So I really was super enthusiastic about consulting from day one on campus. And so I was reading some of the case interview prep books, which we can talk about. But I remember the day I got my offer, I was emceeing this date auction fundraiser for my Model United Nations Club.
Okay.
And I saw my phone rang. It's an unknown number. That's kind of when they called it was unknown. And I'd interviewed that morning in Chicago. I made the drive, so I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. So I literally just handed the microphone over to whoever was nearby, also in the club. Like, I need to take this. You take over MC. In the middle of the crowd. So I went off into the hallway, picked it up. He said, oh, hey, Pete, this is Dalton with Bain & Company. I was like, yes, Dalton.
Totally cool.
It was like, well, hey, we were impressed by your performance in the interviews today, and we wanted to extend you the offer to join us as an intern this summer. And I was like, oh, thank you. Yes, God bless you, Dalton. And I was so exuberant and joyful. My friend Emily was wearing a red puffy jacket. I'll remember this forever. I don't know why. And a big hug for Emily because she was there, and it was cool. So yeah, it was a dream come true. And like all jobs, there are pros and cons, and in real life once you get in the mix. But it was a great experience, and I do recommend it as a solid career choice to really expand your skill set in a hurry.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, let's see. That was a little bit of the journey. I don't know if are you talking about kind of the nuts and bolts, maybe like how does one procure an offer, like to beat the competition?
Yeah, I'm curious. And also, you got yours through the intern process. So, how often do they hire from the intern process versus just coming in off the street? Is it kind of equally are the chances equally good, or do you get a sense for which one they prefer more?
Well, they do lots of intern hiring, I'd say. And I don't have a full data set on
Yeah,
this
sure.
authoritatively, but I mean, I could tell you generally at the undergraduate level in my office, I'd saw maybe a third or a fourth as many interns as there were kind of, fresh out of undergraduate hires. So maybe 6 interns and maybe 20 associate consultants, they would call them. And then at the MBA, kind of graduate business school level, it might be maybe a half in terms of maybe 15 summer associates and maybe 30 full-time consultants hired. So that's kind of the path, and what they're up to is they want to, one, get a heads up in filling their slots, and two, it's a strategic move in which they're deliberately trying to seed target campuses with ambassadors to come and say, oh my gosh, McKinsey's amazing, BCG is the best, so that it kind of boosts their brand and credibility and awareness on the campuses where they're trying to recruit.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you landed the internship, how did you get the interview? Was it were they on your campus, or did you apply online? How did that work?
They were on our campus, and I was at the career fair, and I gave them my resume, and then I also, was talking to Jeff on the inside. I was like, okay, anything I should do differently with my resume here? Any special way I should present it? And so I was asking for his input along the way as well. So that's kind of the scoop. I gave it to them in hand there, as well as our career platform we were using, Simplicity at the time it was called, as well as the Bain.com piece. So I made sure every possible way they could get it. They had it.
That's perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for the people that they interview, who are not coming through the intern program, do you have a sense of how that process works? Is it typically like a behavioral interview? Are there tests involved? Like, how comprehensive is their process?
Well, it's a little different firm by firm, year by year, and office by office. But I can tell you the quintessential hurdle to surpass in getting a job in strategy consulting is the case interview. And so we could talk about what all that means if you want to. I could speak for hours.
Yeah, I would love it.
So the case interview, essentially, they put you on the spot such that you need to solve a business problem live, real time, in front of them. So they might say something like, well, I'm using this case. Our client is a single location canoe rental shop, located in central Illinois. And lately things have felt a lot busier, but the profits have kind of stagnated. It hasn't been growing. So they'd like for you to get to the bottom of why profit is not growing and recommend how they can continue to grow and get to record levels of profit. So that's kind of like the opening prompt. And then we begin the dance. That is the case interview, where the candidate is kind of expected to kind of recap a bit and say, okay, so if I understood you correctly, we're talking about this. Hey, could you clarify this for that, me, or that for me, or kind of what's in our scope? Okay, could I have a moment to collect my thoughts? And then they take a moment, and then they present a bit of a preview, agenda, outline, structure for how they're going to proceed in addressing this question. And then there's a back and forth with the candidate asking some questions and the interviewer sometimes providing some data or charts or exhibits to look at. And then the candidate saying, aha, well, looking at these data, this suggests that perhaps this is going on. Can you tell me, do we have any additional information about that? And so then maybe also some kind of calculating in terms of maybe computing a profit margin percentage or a percentage of customers who feel that way or this way, and then maybe some creative brainstorming, like, oh, we might try this or this or this, and then finally the wrap-up synthesis. So like, well, overall, we've concluded that profits are stagnating due to an over-reliance upon sharp discounts or whatever it is. And so going forward, we recommend that they do that. So it's a bit intense and nerve-wracking to be on the spot in that way and to need to seem sharp and polished and give answers to the question. And they'll subject you to maybe, 3 to 7-ish individual case interviews from different interviewers to collect numerous data points on your problem-solving skills.
Wow, not gonna lie, that sounds super fun to me, but I think for most people they might not enjoy that as much. But gosh, that sounds really fun. It's almost like a puzzle that you're getting to kind of work out there with this group. Mm-hmm.
It's so true. And when you say fun, it's funny because I thought it was fun. I still think it's fun. I do case interview coaching to this day with clients through caseinterview.com, which has a great set of resources for anyone prepping for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is fun. And it's kind of like, if you don't like this, you're probably not going to like the job. So it's a helpful sort of self-screening mechanism right there. Most people say, I really liked solving problems, but I didn't like the extreme evaluation, like my dreams are on the line in this very moment kind of a feeling.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. No, I get it because, interviewing can be really stressful for sure. So I'm curious, when it comes to these kind of interviews, do you think that the big consulting companies look for candidates with certain backgrounds, certain degrees? Like, are there certain kinds of people that you think tend to lend themselves towards this kind of work?
Well, I'd say the strategy consulting firms tend to hire from all backgrounds, anything from literature to religious studies to math, science, and such. I think consulting is a broad term, so there are other consulting firms which will look specifically at kind of financial issues or marketing issues or IT issues, and so they might want a particular level of expertise in those matters, kind of going in. But the strategy consulting firms are more so looking at sort of general problem-solving capabilities. So, I think really the biggest degree that they're hiring from are Masters of Business Administration programs. So top business schools are where they really just descend, and it's quite a lot of activity and hubbub and candidates coming from those places and all at once. So it's essentially come September, October, that things get pretty busy for people interested in consulting firms and for consulting firms recruiting on those campuses.
Yeah, absolutely. How often do you think that they look for undergrads versus graduate students?
Well, I'd say I think the ratio varies kind of firm by firm, but in some ways they try to have teams that consist of both. So a typical consulting engagement team might look something like, okay, we've got a super senior partner who's just like a master expert in mergers and acquisitions or something, and then maybe a junior, and so they're there for maybe 20% of the time. And then you might have a junior partner who is kind of getting up to speed, in that area or maybe that industry. Mm-hmm. And so they're working on that case maybe 50% of the time. So they got maybe two live cases going. And then there's a manager who often has an MBA and has maybe 5+-ish years of experience, who is kind of full-time and kind of making sure everything is getting done and that the client is pleased, day in, day out. And then maybe 1 to 2 consultants who often have MBAs, and then 1 to 2 junior folks, either sort of analysts or associate consultants, as they call them at Bain. And so that's kind of the makeup, is like you'll tend to see a mix, and then the sort of different jobs tend to fall to different people. And they often like to have the undergrads or the fresh out of undergrad folks could really work the data, the model, the Excel piece.
Right.
And so they'll say, hey, you own that, and make sure you don't make any mistakes. 0 defect analysis. That's very intimidating.
Yep. No, that makes sense. You're probably doing lots of pivot tables and whatnot. Well, that's helpful. I think a lot of times when we think of this consulting type of gig at a big, firm as sort of a dream job, we don't often have an idea of what does that mean or what it looks like. I'm also curious, when you worked in consulting, did you find that you were traveling quite a bit, or were your consulting opportunities, were they in the area where you live?
Well, I was traveling a fair bit, and I mean, it's so fascinating. Like, it's pretty relative. What's a lot? I mean, some consultants, that is their standard week is that they fly out Monday morning and fly back Thursday afternoon, week after week after week. So that there could very well be 40 plus weeks out of the year in which they are visiting the airport and heading out somewhere. So that can happen. I'd say in my experience, it was mixed. I think some clients were nearby or that didn't need our constant presence. So we'd maybe pay them a visit every third week or so and do more work over the phone and emailing each other. And others just happened to be rather nearby, such that a quick train ride or rental car got us in the area, and then we could be back at our respective homes at night.
Yeah. I worked in a couple of companies I've worked for. We've had, consultants come in and help us with things. And, they were kind of doing that pretty intense travel schedule. I'm curious, too, how many different clients, I guess, did you have at any one time? Did you typically have just one big one that you were focused on, or did you have, 3, 4, 5 at a time?
I'd say at Bain, it was one. Just about every time. And then at the Bridgespan Group, it was sometimes two. And so that's often the way they work. And it's so interesting because I think on the outside looking in, you think, oh, I'd love to have two clients at once, really kind of broaden my skill set and my experiences and learn a lot. But then in real life, it's like, oh my gosh, I have two sets of demands and leadership. And now I have the extra responsibility of making them kind of play nice with each other, sort of like when you're in school and you got different courses, and sometimes everything is due at once. And it's like, oh my gosh, ouch.
Yeah. So in terms of you've got these competing clients, and sometimes you have competing interests that come up at the same time. I mean, what do you feel, sort of looking back, that was what you really learned from your experience in consulting?
Oh, wow. I'd say many things, but I think most of all, and it's so interesting, it's almost like I had a little bit of this in me, and they just like polished it to a T. It's almost like I felt, it's so funny, I always felt a little bit differently in terms of the way I thought or problem solved. And I remember one time I was at Walmart, and I was in college, and I didn't have much money. But there was a pillow, which I thought was great. And so I maybe had about $250 total to my name at this stage of life. And this pillow cost like $12. So nearly 5% of my whole life savings. And I was just thinking about it. It's like, man, should I purchase this luxury pillow, for myself? And so I laid out my thought process with someone. It's like, well, if you think about it, truly, the benefit of a pillow is that it can enhance the quality of my sleep. And if it enhances the quality of my sleep, then that means I will have more quality, energized hours through which I can live my life. And I could probably even do a couple more hours of work at this job. So essentially, I could expect to recoup the cost of this pillow within a few short weeks. Because I am comfortable. So anyway, going into crazy analytical detail about whether or not to buy this pillow, and I shared this thinking with a friend of mine as we were waiting in the checkout, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, Pete, you're stressing me out. Stop it." And so in a way, it's like I had a glimmer of that kind of natural way of thinking, and then in strategy consulting, it was just really polished it and made it all the clearer in terms of, all right, well, so learning about how to form a hypothesis, and then how to test that hypothesis and structure the specific analyses and things we need to know, prove, do in order to feel great about a given outcome. Because clients, don't want your opinion like, oh, we think this might be a good move. Rather, they want, hard evidence in terms of, we can pretty much prove that if you do this, it's going to save you $30 million. They say, oh, right. Now, we're excited now about this course of action. You really thought this through, and it's all covered neatly. So I'd say, that thought process has been so helpful in being able to evaluate any number of questions, especially running my own business. It's like, should I buy this? Should I do this? And it's like, well, what would need to be true for this to be a good move? Well, it need to be true that it's actually going to deliver the result. It need to be true that it's better than the competitor. And it's like, well, how will I test whether or not? And so it's just like embedded in me now in terms of how I tackle any number of questions or problems, and I feel much more confident about the emerging answers.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like it's something that can really help you sort of lifelong.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I was doing some coaching with a client who was prepping for case interviews, and he said, I shared some of what you taught me with my team, and it was kind of like we cracked the case at work. I would love it if we could maybe do some of this training for my whole team. And that's actually how the Enhanced Thinking Collaboration offering was born, which I've now done with numerous teams. And it was so cool. It's like, yeah, this thinking process is very valuable in a wide array of settings and can truly liberate time and money.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Well, I have kind of a side question to ask. When I worked at big corporations and we brought in consultants from places like Bain, of course, I was always very excited because it was a super smart team. But many of the other people that I work with, they almost viewed the consultants like a threat, and they really were unhappy to see them coming in through the door. Could you ever kind of feel that, where there was maybe some tension with the client?
Well, yes, and it's funny because if you think about the movie Office Space with the Bobs, that's what many people, their impression of consultants is we got two guys who are going to interview a bunch of people and figure out who should be fired afterwards. So it's kind of spooky, that thought. It's like, are you a threat to my livelihood? And so that did happen, and I'd say the more that we weren't doing that, the more we were able to communicate, in terms of saying, hey, we're just trying to figure out, what are the markets that we should be operating in by taking a look at these data associated with that. So many projects did not involve kind of anybody losing their job, and to the extent that we can communicate that in a affirming, a calming way, we did. And at the same time, some projects do involve that kind of work, and that's kind of tricky. And I'd say often what that boiled down to was the team members that the CEO of the client selected to interface with us were already kind of like, chosen in the clear, safe. Mm-hmm. So in that way, it's like they themselves were not threatened, and they knew it. And so there was an ability to have some candid conversations as necessary.
No, it's interesting. I would have to assume that earlier in your career you might not have anticipated a reaction from the client location. I don't know.
A reaction? Well, I never saw anything dramatic, like shouting or turn over tables or anything.
Sure.
But there were times when, folks, that they seemed to clam up a little bit, and they didn't quite care to share that information with you. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to get creative here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so if we are interested to pursue a job in consulting at one of the big consulting groups, what advice might you give for us in terms of how to pursue that opportunity?
Oh, sure thing. Well, I'd say really, I think there's two key steps. Step one is get the interview, and step two is to nail the interview. And so in terms of getting the interview, I think it really boils down to having a great set of experiences captured well on your resume. And here I would emphasize, results, numbers, quantification, and to tell the story that you are, as Victor Chang of CaseInterview.com puts it, a super achieving math nerd with exceptional people skills. I think it's very succinct and accurate. It's like, show me that. Like, you are a winner that just makes great things happen again and again. You have impressive intellectual capabilities as roughly proxy measured by GPA test scores, which they do request. It's wild. Your high school test score if they want to know them. Mm-hmm. Or kind of just excellent scholarships or sets of responsibilities or complex challenges that you're tackling, as well as people skills that you were able to to lead, guide, and collaborate with many different kinds of folks to produce a result. So I'd say have some great documents associated with your resume, cover letter. Ideally, do a bit of networking so you're ensured that someone's actually looking at it. You don't want it to sort of slip through the cracks. And then, if you have the interview, from there, then it's just a matter of getting up to speed with this unique format, which is a little tricky. And I think there's some great resources there. I think my top recommendations would be the book Case Interview Secrets by Victor Cheng.
Oh, great.
At caseinterview.com. And he also has an audio program called Look Over My Shoulder, which is pretty cool. It just sort of shows recordings of him interviewing candidates and then commenting, hey, what went well, what went not so well. And then they have a number of other products as well to get prepped up there. So I think that's the name of the game. It's not something that you can just sort of read up on 20 minutes before the interview. It's like some candidates, no joke, do over 50 practice interviews prior to the big day.
Wow. That's intense, but I'm sure it helps.
It does, and there's probably some diminishing returns, and it's hard to know, what's the magic number. People ask me this, and it's hard to know. It's kind of like, well, how many hours do you need to study for the GMAT, LSAT, or MCAT? I mean, you might be close or you might be far in terms of those skills and how naturally they're already kind of in your brain.
No, I totally agree. I actually get that question a lot, especially about the GMAT, because that's, I took that for business school, and, I often suggest just go take it. It's good to see like what you might score on your own with a test like that, and then start to put in some studying and see if you can improve your score over time. But I know, at least for myself, I got the same score before and after hundreds of hours of studying.
Oh, no kidding.
But they were both good scores. So I could have probably saved myself some pain and maybe some money as well to go with the first good score. You know what I mean? As opposed to jumping through hoops to try to improve on something. But so I have another question too. I'm curious, I think of consulting as something, and feel free to correct me if this is wrong, but I've always kind of pictured it in my mind as something that you do when you're young and you're peppy and you have the energy to stay up late and travel, and you get all this great experience under your belt and your resume looks awesome. And then at some point you move on and you do something different and you take all those experiences. First, is that a correct assumption? And second, what do people do when they move on from one of these big consulting companies?
Oh, sure thing. Well, I'd say that is often how it works.
Okay.
In terms of, fresh out of undergrad, fresh out of business school, because that's where most of the hires happen, at that point in life. So folks may be 22 years old, maybe 28 years old, kind of getting going there. And then it's true, the hours are more than 9 to 5. It might be 55, 60 plus hours worked in a week. And the travel is often not just, here and there, but rather sometimes kind of week after week that does happen. And so that can take its toll. It can exhaust folks, and particularly if they've got young kids, they're like, "What? I'm not getting to see my children as much as I want to. This is not worth it in terms of cost benefit trade-offs that we're working with here." So I'd say it's common that is the pathway that unfolds, but it's absolutely not the only way. And what's so fun is sometimes when I remember I could think of managers and partners who, I'm just chatting with them and it's like, "Oh yeah, how'd the meeting go?" And like their eyes light up. Like, "Oh, it was a great meeting. We talked about this." But then they wondered about that. And we told them about the data you done associated with that analysis. And they were totally at ease with that. And so it's kind of like, this guy is coming to life, like a good meeting lights up this man. And by golly, he was born to be a consultant for life, and God bless him. That's great. So there are absolutely folks that find that's what fits for them, and they say, "Hey, no job is perfect, and this job is a few more hours in travel than I'd like, but wow, it's fascinatingly stimulating for my brain, and the compensation's excellent, and it has these other benefits. So this is a set of trade-offs that I'm willing to make over the long haul that work for me and my family." So So yes, I'd say it's a common pathway, but it's not the only way it goes by any means. And to your second point, in terms of what do folks do next? I mean, it's a little bit of everything. I'd say among the most common things are for undergrads, the most common thing is going to business school afterwards. For those who don't care to do business school or do something else, I think private equity is a big one.
Ooh, interesting.
Using those skills to make portfolio companies more valuable after they're acquired. I'd say also there's a corporate strategy is a popular one in terms of bringing those kind of skills in-house to a large company. And then after that, it's a little bit of everything. I've seen nonprofits. I've seen entrepreneurship like myself. I've seen just people have a fascination with some particular area, like sports. He's like, you know what? That's always been my dream. I'm going to go work there. Or I think in some ways it's pretty chic, especially in California, to go for some funded startup in terms like they seem to just like the cachet or whatever. So it's like, oh, this guy's really smart, and we need people really smart. So
right.
You just fit here, at Airbnb or whatever, sort of funded startups.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I could really see that. It's a great pathway, to your future, whichever way you go. And, as I mentioned, you have been able to start your own successful business, and you also have, a successful podcast, the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast. I'd love it if you could share with us a little bit about sort of what your podcast is about. And then I'd love to know, if there's anything in particular that you feel like you've learned from your podcast guests.
Oh, wow. So much is my answer to both. So what the podcast is about, it's, I guess the core line is sharpening the universal skills to flourish at work. And so in some ways, that seems like almost everything is included, but I can assure you that I reject the vast majority of guest pitches I receive because they don't quite fit. And many of the times folks want to share about their entrepreneurial journey or how you can market more successfully or how to overcome great odds to achieve success, or how you can be fit and healthy. And I entertain a couple of those. It's like, okay, if you're healthy, you're energized, and you're thinking better, that kind of, I can see that. So I do a little bit of those here and there. And so, but that's kind of the scoop, is like I love chatting with folks who have some real expertise associated with like productivity. We had David Allen of Getting Things Done on episode 15. Or associated with networking. So we had Susan Rowan on episode 9, who talks about mingling and how that works, or problem solving, creativity, kind of all these things. It's like in most professional jobs, there's a particular set of skills, to quote Liam Neeson from the movie Taken, that you kind of need if you're going to do well and flourish there. And so I like chatting with folks who are really experts in that, either from their speaking, writing training, or from their own lived experience. So it's a little bit different than job hunting, although there's a touch of that here and there.
Sure.
And it's a lot different from your entrepreneurial journey, and it's little. I think there's a lot of podcasts associated with. We interview amazing people about how to be amazing, and that's kind of fun. I like some of that, but this is a bit more narrow in terms of. We're talking about in the world of your career.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, have there been any, sort of major takeaways from those folks? I mean, is there something that you feel like has just been like a sort of a theme throughout?
Well, I've thought about this, and in a way there are several themes, and I think a lot of it just boils down to caring. That you really are engaged and concerned with what you're working on. Like it matters to you that the product gets launched, that the defects get reduced, that the factory is optimized. Like whatever you're responsible for, that it really matters to you, such that you are thinking about and working with it. And then in terms of individual practices, at the end of each guest, I do what I call the fast faves. So I say, hey, tell me about a favorite quote or favorite book or a favorite personal practice. And what I've been fascinated how is two practices have come up again and again and again amongst these high achievers. And one of them is meditation. Some sort of mindfulness exercise, whether it's just focusing on your breath for a few minutes or whatever, in terms of clearing the mind and giving it the ability to kind of refocus on what's most important. And the second thing is also about focusing on what's most important, is just every day writing down, the top 3, the top 5 things that are most important to be achieved in that day, and to focus your attention on those matters, and to minimize the degree to which you're distracted by mediocre little requests. And I'd say maybe 40% of my 67-ish guests have said one or the other of those as their kind of transformative personal practice.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting how you can start to sort of recognize those themes that a lot of very successful people, are all sort of doing in their personal time. Well, so I'm curious, is there anything new that you have coming up that we should be on the lookout for?
Oh, thank you. Well, I don't know if it's super new, but I mean, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, there's a new episode of the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast. And so I think it'd be fun if folks care to check that out. And then if folks are looking to upgrade the skills of their team and save some money and reduce some waste, I am a believer in this training program, the Enhanced Thinking and Collaboration piece over at awesomeatyourjob.com. And so those have been fun. So it's not new to me, but it's new to those who receive it. And it's been really cool to see the positive feedback. Oh, great. So you mentioned that we can find you at awesomeatyourjob.com. Where else can we find you? Are you on Twitter? Are you on Facebook? I am, yes. It's Pete Awe.
Well, Pete, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really great to talk to you, and it's been so interesting to learn about your journey as a consultant.
Oh, thank you, Angela. It's been a lot of fun, and I wish you lots of luck.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks to those of you who sent me questions. You can send me your questions to Angela@CopelandCoaching.com. You can also send me your questions via Twitter. I'm at Copeland Coach, and on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. Please don't forget to help me out. Subscribe on iTunes and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.